The French Revolution begins. The French Revolution was a 10-year period in France where they went through a lot of economic and government changes. At this time, France was running on a social and political system called the Old Regime, which separated the country into 3 estates, or social classes. King Louis XVI was the King of France. He was a big problem because he was indecisive, paid little attention to government advisors, and had little patience for the details of governing. This led to a heavy downfall in the government. King Louis was selfish and ran the government around himself. However, the biggest problem was the way the Third Estate saw the old regime. They disliked that they were made up of 97% of the population, and even though it was the most people, they had no privileges and had to pay most of the taxes, unlike the other 2 estates. In June 1789, the Third Estate established the National Assembly so they could make decisions for themselves. Revolution brings reform and terror. The peasants began attacking, and the nobles and officers of the church were scared. On August 4th, 1789, nobles gave speeches on liberty and equality to try to keep everyone at peace. At this point, the Third Estate and other civilians were having more of a problem with Marie Antoinette because she was spending their money and the government's money on her own personal gowns, jewels, and parties. She didn't care about them. Their motto was liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they were fighting the people because they wanted to be seen as strong and equal and empowered. They didn't want to be smashed down by the First and Second Estates any longer. The revolution began to change France. It made the priests and officials elected and paid jobs, and the church had to sell land to try to pay off France's debt. This infuriated the peasants because they were strong in their Catholic faith. Soon the peasants opposed Assembly's reform. At this point, the people were motivated by fear, but although they were scared, the peasants were getting the reform they had been hoping for, and France was making a turnaround. Men were giving speeches and discussing how France was changing at this time. As France became a more in-depth government, they created a Declaration of Rights of a Man and Citizen, and this was giving the Third Estate the equality that they had been hoping for. Napoleon forges an empire. A few years later, Napoleon Bonaparte was 16 years old and he was sent into the army. He began to make his own changes to France and built it into his own empire. In 1799, he had his coup d'etat and fought for his reign as king. Napoleon's coup d'etat was his quick coming to power as a dictator. This happened because he felt he was the best person to run France, but others didn't agree with him, so he had to get it done himself. In 1804, the people began to see Napoleon as their ruler already because he was their dictator, so he was crowned their ruler, or king. Although Napoleon made several great decisions throughout his reign, he was only able to maintain the strong French Empire for about 5 years, from 1807 to 1812. As leader, Napoleon took it upon himself to reform France in their laws that they were following, and he created his own Napoleonic Code, which is his own set of laws that he believed the people should follow. During Napoleon's reign, he was left to clean up after King Louis XVI. Although he kept many of the changes that were made by the Revolution, he did change the way tax collection was, and this bettered the country. He also created a plebiscite, which was the vote of the people, which he used to help approve the new constitution. He also made lycées, which were government-run public schools. This helped to better the country during this time. Napoleon's empire collapses. Napoleon made three mistakes that led to the collapse of France: the French blockade, the Peninsula War, and the invasion of Russia. He took a lot of risks of battle and wars that also cost a lot of money that, if they failed, would take France down. And that's what they did. The Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna was a series of meetings in Vienna. They were called to set up policies to achieve security and stability. During these meetings, Prince Clemens von Metternich made a plan to help Europe during their times of need. This plan was set around making each country stronger. His plan helped the five great powers not wage war on each other for over 40 years. This created a peace among Europe. They also were changing the governments to make them more conservative. And all of Europe was on the same plan and had the same ideas at this time, which created peace throughout Europe.